Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this Warrior of Rohan. To start off with, I've primed him with black. And first of all, I'm coming in with Mournfang Brown, and I'm painting this on this inner cloak here in the middle. It's just a little spot, so just make sure you catch this with a couple of coats of Mournfang Brown. Once those couple of coats have dried, the next step is to come in with some Rhinox hide, and we're going to paint the outer robes. So that's these parts here on the sides, and he's also got a couple of bits on his sleeves as well. So just take your time, work your way around, and pick out all of those outer robes with a couple of coats of Rhinox hide. Once the Rhinox hide has dried and given you a nice solid base cover, the next step is we'll be painting his cloak. So for this I'm coming in with Castilian green, and this is going to take a couple of coats. This is quite a thin paint and doesn't give you the best coverage. Just work your way over the cloak in a couple of thin coats, giving everything a solid base cover of Castilian green. After the first coat, you can see it's still a little bit see-through, so come back with another coat just to give it a solid cover. Once the cloak is dried, the next step is we're going to paint all of his armour and metallics. So for this I'm coming with Lead Belcher. Be careful with this, you don't want to get this onto any of the colours we've painted previously. Pick out the armour. So that's this plate here on his chest. It's also got some on his helmet as well. And he has a couple of guards on his ankles as well. So make sure you catch all of that with a good solid cover of Lead Belcher. Now that the metal's all picked out, the next step is I'm going to put any wood. I'm going to come in with some Dryad bark and just catch all of his bow with a couple of coats of Dryad bark. With the wood painted, it's starting to come together. So the next step is I'm going to want to paint all of his skin. There's not a lot on this model, so come in with some Bugman's Glow and catch his face and his hands with a couple of thin coats of Bugman's Glow. Being careful not to get this onto any of our previous steps. Just take your time and catch all of his skin. After a couple of coats, skin's got a nice solid base cover. Now I'm going to paint all of his straps and his quiver. So for this I'm using Steel Legion Drab. Just work your way around the model, catching any straps like this one here around his chest and his sort of belt. and the quiver on his back as well. Just make sure you catch all of that with a couple of coats of Steel Legion Drab. With all the straps painted and with a nice solid base cover on all of those, the next step, I'm going to want to paint the arrows in his quiver. So I'm coming in with Mephiston Red and just giving those feathers a quick base coat of Mephiston Red. With the arrows painted, we've only a couple of steps left to do. So now I'm coming with Corvus Black, and for this I'm just going to paint his boots. A little bit sticking out here at the bottom, so just make sure you catch that with a coat of Corvus Black. With the boots painted, the next step is I'm going to base coat his hair. So for this, I'm coming in with Avalanche Sunset. Just be nice and careful here, you really don't want to get this over anything we've painted so far. Just give a couple of coats to all of the hair, so it's these bits coming down on the back of his head. He's also got a bit of a mustache as well. So make sure you catch all of that with a couple of thin coats of Everland Sunset. The hair painted, there's only one more base cover left to go. So for this, I'm going to come in with some Retributor armour and just pick out a little bit of gold. So he's got this band around the front of his helmet, and I've also painted one going over the top of the helmet as well. Be nice and neat, and just catch this band going around the helmet with a layer of Retributor armour. And there you are, that's all of the base coats placed down. So now I'm going to start shading. So I'm coming with Reichland Flesh Shade. For this, I'm going to catch all of the skin and his hair. So that's everything we painted. Bugman's Glow and Avalanche Sunset. Give a quick shade of Reichland Flesh Shade. Now with Agrax Earthshade, I'm going to paint everything we did Mournfang Brown and Steel Legion Drab. So it's that inner cloak and the straps and the quiver and those bits on his arms as well. Make sure you catch all of those with some Agrax Earthshade. Next up's the cloak. So I'm using Biltan Green, giving that green cloak a quick wash with Biltan Green. And finally, everything else gets a coat of Nuln Oil. So that's the bow, the metal, and the Rhinox hide. Just give all of that a shade of Nuln Oil. Once the shades have dried, you can really see the definition that that's brought out in the model. So next, we're going to start highlighting everything up, starting with his cloak. So for this, I'm coming in with some Castilian green again. I'm going to place this where the shade didn't settle. So you'll be able to see lines where the shade has moved into the recess. So paint some Castilian green on either side of that. So it's like this raised area here. This gets a coat. And then you can see where it's just settled into that crevice. So I'm coming back onto the other side and laying a bit of Castilian green again, nice and thin, to bring it back to that original colour. So take your time with this step, work your way around, finding everywhere that the shade hasn't settled, put a thin coat of Castilian green. Now after that first coat of Castilian green, you can start to see that it's bringing the colours back in. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix, Castilian green and Strachan green, nice and thin. I'm going to place this in the middle of those previous steps. So where we just placed the pure Castilian green on those raised areas, I'm coming in with this 50-50 mix, placing some of this in the middle. By having this nice and thin, it will help build up those transitions. Nice highlighted effect. So you just work your way around, finding everywhere that you put previous step, putting a nice thin coat of this in the middle. If you want, you can come back in for a second coat and help build those transitions up even more. Just take your time, work your way around the model. After that 50-50 mix is applied, you can start to see that we're bringing those highlights into the model. So now I'm just coming in with some pure Strachan green and applying this like an edge highlight on all the most prominent areas. So it's the tops of all of the folds. Put a nice thin line of Strachan green. And also the edge of the cloak as well. Put another thin line of Strachan green all the way around. And this will act as your final highlight and make the cloak look really nice. Just take your time with this step, work your way around the model, and all of the most raised details, put a thin line of Strachan green. Some of these sharp edges here, like the edge of the cloak, you can use the side of your brush. Just gently run it along the sharp edge, and it'll give you a nice highlight without having to worry about keeping your tip too fine. That's the cloak finished. It's nicely highlighted and added some definition back into the model. So the next thing we're going to highlight is the outer robe. So coming back in with rhinox hide. And much like on the cloak, put this on all the areas where the shade hasn't settled. So you'll see the darker bit where the known oil's gone in. And then come on either side with thin layers of rhinox hide to bring that colour back up. After that first coat of rhinox hide is applied, we're adding that definition back into that robe. So next, it's a 50-50 mix of rhinox hide and Gawthor brown. We place this in the middle of where we placed those previous steps. So wherever you place some rhinox hide before, just come in with a little bit of this 50-50 mix in the middle to build that transition and highlight. Built that transition up on his cloak, so now it's just an edge highlight of Gawthor brown. So as before, this is right around the very edge as an edge highlight. You can use the side of your brush on those sharper details. And all the most pronounced folds and creases, put a thin line of Gawthor brown right on the very peak of the folds. So just work your way around the model, pick out every fold with a little line of Gawthor brown. And that's the outer row highlighted. So the next thing we're going to do is highlight the wood. So for this, I'm coming in with Baneblade Brown. I'm using a dry brush and just gently flicking over the wood just to give it a little bit of a highlight and a bit of a grain look. Be nice and neat. You don't want to flick this onto any of the other parts of the model. And that is the bow highlighted. So next we're going to work on the skin. So to start with, I'm coming in with some Cadian flesh tone, and you do want this to be nice and thin as you pick all of the areas where the Whiteclan flesh shade didn't settle. So it's the nose, the cheek, the bottom lips, and if you can, try and be as neat as possible. Catch out the fingers as well, where the shade settled between them. Put a thin layer of Cadian flesh tone on each one, and catch his elbow and the back of his hand as well. When that Cadian flesh tone has dried, the next step is we're going to come in with Kislev flesh. First, it's more of a spot highlight, so it's things like the tips of his nose, his very bottom lip. Just put a thin little line or a dot of Kislev flesh to act like an edge highlight on all of the prominent details. So it's around his elbow here. I put a little dot on the tips of his fingers and the knuckles as well. Let's just be nice and neat here. You don't want to catch this on anything you don't want to be highlighted. Just catch all the most prominent details. So that's the skin highlighted. The next step is we're going to paint in his eyes. So to start with this, I'm using a Abaddon black. I'm going to be very neat here and just sink a little bit of this into the eye sockets. It's just a nice thin line in each eye of Abaddon black. Once that's dried, come in with a bit of white scar and put that as a thin line inside that black. Then the final part of the eye is come in with black again. I put a little vertical line in the eye that acts as a pupil. So if you go too thick with this, you can cut back in with your white again and keep going back and forth until you get an eye that you're happy with. So with the skin and face done, the next thing I'm going to highlight is his inner cloak. For this, I'm just coming in with Scrag Brown and just giving an edge highlight to that Mournfang Brown. So it's just a line down here along the most prominent fold and along the bottom as an edge highlight. There's a nice quick and easy step for that one. And next, we're going to highlight the straps and the quiver. So I'm coming back in with Steel Legion Drab for this. And all these ones here around his arms. And wherever the shade hasn't settled on the most prominent areas, I'm just putting a little bit of Steel Legion Drab to help bring it back up to its original colour. Just work your way around the model on each side of where the shade has settled, just put a little bit of Steel Legion Drab. So that's all of the straps, the first highlight applied to them. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix, Balor Brown and Steel Legion Drab, and this is only on the quiver. I'm going to put this in the middle of each one of those straps. To be nice and neat, take your time, a little bit of this mix in the middle of each one of those straps that's on the quiver. That's added some colour to the quiver. So now the next step is just an edge highlight of pure Balor Brown on the edges of all of these straps. So on the quiver here, sort of put one in the middle of each of those parts we just highlighted. Then on the belt, I'm putting one right around the edge, just a thin line of pure Balor Brown as an edge highlight on all of the straps. The same as the ones here, just put a thin line Balor Brown to edge highlight them all. So now the Rohan Warrior is really starting to come together. The next thing I'm going to highlight quickly is his boots. So for this, I'm using some Mechanica Standard Grey and just putting a little line on any detail place up on the boot. So it's here around the tips of the boots and any folds that are sculpted into them. Just put a little line of Mechanica Standard Grey. So I'm going to highlight the hair. I'm using Tau Light Ochre for this, and take your time and pick out all of the strands that are sculpted into him. Be nice and neat with this. Just work your way around. In each of the sculpted strands, put a thin line of Tau Light Ochre. So next up, I'm going to highlight the arrows. For this, I'm using Wild Rider Red, and just picking out any of the sort of raised details and pronounced bits of sculpting that are on the feathers with a little spot of Wild Rider Red. And now all that's left to highlight is the metal. So to start off with, I'm going to highlight the silver. I'm coming in with Stormhost Silver. And just doing an edge highlight on any of the metal areas. So that's these guards on his boots. On his helmet, get a line of Stormhost Silver. And his scale mail here. For that, you can just pick out the edges of some of the scales with a little bit of Stormhost Silver. And that's all of the silver highlighted. All that's left to highlight now is the gold. This coming in with a little bit of Liberator Gold, and just putting a little bit of this on everything we painted Retributor armour, just to give that a little bit of a shine from the sun or from the light. And there it is. There's a Warrior of Rohan completed. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And have fun painting.